What happens when a police chief's son walks into my courtroom and makes the biggest mistake of his life? In 38 years on this bench, I've never seen arrogance shattered so completely. But what happened next didn't just change one family forever, it proved that some fathers choose justice over blood. Let me tell you about the most shocking case I've ever presided over. It started as a routine Thursday morning in Providence Municipal Court. I was reviewing case files when my clerk handed me one that made my blood run cold. Derek Matthews, age 34, charged with assault and battery on an elderly person. The victim's name stopped me completely. Robert Chen, 72 years old, decorated Vietnam veteran. But here's what nobody in that packed courtroom knew yet. Derek's father, Police Chief William Matthews, was sitting in the back row, watching everything unfold. He hadn't told his son he was coming, and what he was about to do would shock everyone, including me. 3 days earlier, Robert Chen was walking his small dog near Waterfront Park when Derek Matthews came speeding through in his Porsche. Chen raised his hand, asking the driver to slow down near the playground where children were playing. Derek slammed his brakes, jumped out, and confronted this elderly man. According to witnesses, Derek shoved Chen so hard the veteran hit the pavement, breaking his hip. As Chen lay there in pain, Derek allegedly said, "Do you know who my father is? I own this city." Then he drove away, leaving a decorated war hero bleeding on the sidewalk. When Derek walked into my courtroom that morning, everything about his demeanor screamed entitlement. Designer suit, expensive watch, and that smirk that told me he believed his daddy's badge would save him. He glanced at Robert Chen sitting in the gallery with his walker and showed absolutely no remorse. "Mr. Matthews," I began, "you're charged with assault on Mr. Chen, a Vietnam veteran who served our country with honor. How do you plead?" Derek's lawyer jumped up immediately. "Not guilty, Your Honor. This is clearly a misunderstanding." I held up my hand. "I asked your client, counselor. Mr. Matthews, do you have a voice?" Derek stood up, adjusted his jacket with theatrical confidence, and looked me straight in the eye. "Not guilty, Judge. This whole thing is blown out of proportion. Some old guy got in my way, and now everyone's making a federal case out of nothing." The courtroom fell silent. Did he just call a decorated veteran some old guy? Did he just minimize putting a 72-year-old man in the hospital? I've been doing this for nearly 4 decades. I've seen every type of defendant imaginable. But Derek Matthews represented something that made my blood boil. Someone who believed his family's position placed him above accountability. "Mr. Matthews," I said, removing my glasses slowly, "before we proceed, I want you to understand exactly who you assaulted. Mr. Chen, would you please stand and tell this court about your service?" Robert Chen rose carefully, supporting himself on his walker. His voice was steady despite his injuries. "Your Honor, I served in the United States Army from 1969 to 1972, 2 tours in Vietnam. I was awarded the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. After the war, I worked as a school teacher for 35 years, teaching children about respect, honor, and service." The dignity in those words filled the courtroom. Here was a man who had given everything for his country, and Derek Matthews had dismissed him as an obstacle. "Mr. Matthews," I continued, "you just heard from a man who risked his life for your freedom, a man who dedicated his life to educating children. And you called him some old guy who got in your way. Do you have anything to say to that?" Derek's smirk wavered slightly, but his arrogance held firm. "Look, Judge, I didn't know he was a veteran. How was I supposed to know? But my father runs law enforcement in this city. Maybe we can work something out here." That's when I knew Derek Matthews had just sealed his fate. He was trying to use his father's position to escape consequences for assaulting a war hero. But what happened next shocked everyone in that courtroom, including me. "Chief Matthews," I called out, looking toward the back of the room, "would you please come forward?" Derek spun around, his face going pale as his father stood up from the gallery. Chief William Matthews walked down the center aisle with the measured steps of a man carrying 30 years of law enforcement experience. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was heartbreak mixed with determination. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Derek stammered. Chief Matthews took his position next to the defendant's table, his police training evident in his posture. "Your Honor, thank you for allowing me to speak." "Chief Matthews," I said, Your son seems to believe your position will protect him from consequences. He just suggested we work something out based on your authority. Would you like to address that? What happened next will stay with me forever." Chief Matthews looked at his son, then back at me. "Your Honor, my son is wrong, dead wrong. I've spent 30 years upholding the law in this city. I've arrested murderers, drug dealers, corrupt officials. Not once have I ever believed my badge gave me or my family special privileges." Derek tried to interrupt, but his father held up his hand with unmistakable authority. "I watched the security footage, Your Honor. I saw what my son did to Mr. Chen. I visited Mr. Chen in the hospital and apologized on behalf of my family, but apologies don't undo assault." The chief's voice grew stronger. "Mr. Chen served this country in Vietnam while I was still a teenager. He earned the Bronze Star and Purple Heart defending the freedoms my son takes for granted. Then he spent 35 years teaching children, including children of police officers, about honor and respect." I watched Derek's face crumble as his father continued. "Your Honor, I'm not here as Police Chief Matthews. I'm here as William Matthews, a father who failed to teach his son that privilege means responsibility, not exemption from consequences." The chief turned to face Derek directly. "Son, I love you, but love means holding you accountable, not protecting you from the consequences you've earned." Then Chief Matthews did something unprecedented. He looked back at me and said, "Your Honor, whatever sentence you determine is appropriate, you have my complete support. In fact, I believe my son should face enhanced consequences because he tried to use my position to escape justice." Derek broke down completely, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," his father replied firmly. "You meant it when you called Mr. Chen some old guy. You meant it when you left him bleeding on the pavement. And you meant it when you tried to use my badge to escape responsibility. I've presided over thousands of cases, but I'd never witnessed anything like this. A police chief publicly supporting justice over his own son's freedom." "Chief Matthews," I said, "your courage in putting principle above personal pain shows why this community respects you. Your son is fortunate to have a father who loves him enough to let him face consequences." I turned to Derek, whose arrogance had completely evaporated. "Mr. Matthews, your father just demonstrated more integrity in 5 minutes than you've shown in your entire adult life. He could have used his influence to make this disappear. Instead, he chose to honor Mr. Chen and uphold the law." The sentence I delivered was comprehensive: 90 days in county jail, 200 hours of community service at the VA hospital, mandatory anger management counseling, and a formal apology to Mr. Chen to be read publicly. But the real transformation happened afterward. Derek served his sentence with humility, working with elderly veterans who taught him about service and sacrifice. Mr. Chen eventually forgave him, and they developed an unlikely friendship built on respect and redemption. Chief Matthews attended every court hearing during Derek's rehabilitation, not to protect his son, but to support his growth into a better man. 6 months later, Derek returned to court a changed person. He had lost the arrogance, gained perspective, and found purpose working with veterans organizations. "Your Honor," he said during his final hearing, "I can't undo what I did to Mr. Chen, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure other young people understand that respect isn't optional, service matters, and everyone deserves dignity regardless of their age or status." But here's what I haven't told you yet. The most remarkable part of this story happened after the cameras stopped rolling. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, I watched Chief Matthews stand alone in that courtroom, tears streaming down his weathered face. The other officers present didn't know whether to comfort their chief or give him space. The veterans in the gallery approached him one by one, shaking his hand, telling him he'd done the right thing. But it was Robert Chen who provided the moment that still gives me chills. The elderly veteran slowly made his way over to Chief Matthews, supporting himself on his walker. The courtroom held its breath. Here was the man who'd been assaulted, approaching the father of his attacker. "Chief Matthews," Chen said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent room, "your boy is going to be all right. You know why? Because he has a father who loves him enough to let him fall and strong enough to help him get back up." Chief Matthews broke down completely then, this tough law enforcement veteran sobbing like a child as Chen placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I raised 5 children, Chen continued. Sometimes the hardest thing about being a parent is stepping aside and letting life teach them what we couldn't. What happened over the next few weeks shocked our entire community. Derek's story spread across social media, picked up by news outlets nationwide. The video of his father's courtroom testimony went viral, viewed millions of times by parents struggling with their own difficult children. But the real transformation began in county jail. Derek's first night in lockup, he found himself in a cell next to Marcus Rivera, a 63-year-old veteran serving time for unpaid fines. When Rivera learned why Derek was there, he didn't show anger, he showed disappointment. "Kid," Rivera said through the bars, "I knew your victim. Robert Chen taught my granddaughter in 3rd grade. Kindest man you'd ever meet. Spent his own money buying school supplies for kids whose families couldn't afford them." That's when Derek truly understood what he'd done. He hadn't just assaulted some old guy. He'd attacked a pillar of the community, a man who'd spent his life serving others. During his 90 days behind bars, Derek encountered 12 more veterans. Each had a story about service, sacrifice, and what it really meant to serve your community. Slowly, painfully, Derek began to understand the magnitude of his crime, not just legally, but morally. His community service at the VA hospital proved even more transformative. Derek's first assignment was helping wheelchair-bound veterans navigate the facility. His supervisor was Maria Santos, a former Army medic who'd lost her leg in Afghanistan. "You think you had it rough growing up with a cop for a dad?" Santos challenged him during his first week. "Try growing up knowing that service means something, that sacrifice matters, and that every day you're alive is a gift paid for by someone else's blood." Derek wanted to quit that first week. The work was humbling, sometimes heartbreaking. He helped veterans shower, fed those who couldn't feed themselves, listened to stories of courage he'd never imagined possible. But gradually, something shifted inside him. 3 months into his community service, Derek met Thomas Bradley, an 80-year-old veteran who'd served in Korea alongside Robert Chen 50 years earlier. Bradley had been asking to meet the young man who'd hurt his old friend. "Chen forgave you," Bradley told Derek during their first conversation. "You know why? Because that's who he is. But forgiveness isn't permission, son. It's responsibility. You've got to earn the gift he gave you." Derek began visiting Chen regularly during his off hours, not because it was required, but because he needed to understand the man he'd wronged. Chen never lectured him, never made him feel guilty. Instead, he shared stories about his students, his military service, his belief that everyone deserves respect, regardless of age, race, or background. "Dignity isn't negotiable," Chen told him during one visit. "It's not something you earn or lose based on your status. It's something you give to others because they're human beings. That's what I tried to teach your father's officers when they visited my classroom for community programs." Derek learned that his father had been bringing police recruits to Chen's classroom for years, teaching them about community engagement and respect for elders. The irony wasn't lost on him. His father had been learning about respect from the very man Derek had assaulted. The breakthrough came during Derek's 6th month of community service. He was helping organize a Veterans Day ceremony when he overheard 2 young officers joking about old-timers who couldn't keep up with modern policing. Derek felt rage building inside him, the same anger that had led him to assault Chen. But this time, instead of acting on it, he walked over and introduced the officers to 3 Purple Heart recipients, including a Marine who'd saved his entire platoon in Vietnam. "These men," Derek told the surprised officers, "have more courage in their pinky fingers than I had in my entire body before I met them. They taught me something my father tried to teach me for years. That strength isn't about power over others, it's about service to others." Word of Derek's transformation reached me through the VA hospital coordinator. She reported that he'd become one of their most dedicated volunteers, arriving early, staying late, and forming genuine friendships with the veterans he served. But the moment that convinced me Derek had truly changed came during his final court appearance. Chief Matthews sat in the same spot where he'd delivered his devastating testimony months earlier, but this time his face showed pride instead of heartbreak. Derek approached the bench carrying a thick folder. "Your Honor," Derek began, "I've completed all requirements of my sentence, but I want to show you something." He opened the folder, revealing dozens of letters from veterans he'd worked with at the hospital. "These men and women taught me what my father tried to teach me my whole life. That character is measured by how you treat people who can't help you, and that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down." Derek's voice strengthened as he continued. "I started a program at the VA hospital called Bridges, connecting younger community service workers with elderly veterans. We've had over 200 participants in 6 months, not because the court ordered it, but because these veterans have stories that need to be heard." He turned to face Robert Chen, who was sitting in the gallery. "Mr. Chen, I can never undo what I did to you, but I can promise that I'll spend the rest of my life making sure other young people understand what I didn't, that every person deserves respect, and that true privilege means using whatever advantages you have to serve others." Chief Matthews requested permission to speak. "Your Honor, 6 months ago my son was an arrogant young man who believed his last name made him special. Today he's a man I'm proud to call my son, not because he's my blood, but because he's learned what it means to serve others." The chief paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Robert Chen didn't just forgive my boy, he transformed him, and in doing so he transformed our entire family's understanding of what justice really means." Robert Chen slowly stood to address the court one final time. "Your Honor, I never wanted revenge against this young man. I wanted redemption, and that's exactly what I've witnessed. Derek has shown me that people can change, that accountability can lead to transformation, and that sometimes the greatest victories come from the greatest defeats." As I dismissed Derek's case that day, I reflected on what I'd witnessed over the previous year. This wasn't just about one young man learning humility, it was about an entire community discovering what true justice looks like. Derek's story became a catalyst for change throughout Providence. The police department instituted new community engagement programs. The VA hospital saw a surge in volunteer applications. Local schools began teaching about respect for elders and veterans. But perhaps most importantly, Chief Matthews' courage in choosing principle over protection inspired other parents facing similar challenges with their children. I received letters from across the country, from parents thanking him for showing that real love sometimes requires letting our children face consequences. That case taught me something profound about justice. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to protect their child from consequences. Chief Matthews chose his principles over his parental instincts, and it saved his son's soul. Real justice isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation. It's about holding people accountable while giving them the chance to become better. And sometimes it takes a father's courage to choose what's right over what's easy. That's what happened the day Police Chief William Matthews chose justice over blood and proved that true love sometimes means letting go.